Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty huge shift in how we think about work. It's a story about how treating people like, well, people, not just cogs in a machine, was discovered almost by accident. And you'll see how that discovery still completely shapes how we think about leadership today.
So let's just jump right in with this question. It's kind of wild, right? We're always chasing the next big thing in management, the latest trend. But what if one of the most powerful ideas has actually been sitting right there for nearly a century? We're about to go on a little journey that kicks off with a super simple factory experiment, but it ends up completely rewriting the playbook for leadership and motivation.
You know, to really get why this was such a revolution, you got to understand the world it replaced. Back in the early 20th century, companies were obsessed with just one thing: efficiency. The big idea was something called scientific management, and it basically saw companies as giant machines. And people, well, people were just the interchangeable parts. And the promise of this whole system, it just didn't match up with the reality. On one hand, yeah, the goal was peak efficiency. Everything standardized, everything controlled from the top down. But for the actual workers, oh man, the reality was often pretty brutal. The work was so monotonous, totally alienating. They had zero control, no sense of ownership. And all of this just created this constant, intense conflict with management. The human cost of this human-machine idea was getting way too big to ignore.
And this is where our story takes this completely unexpected turn. See, a bunch of researchers at the Western Electric Hawthorne plant near Chicago, they weren't trying to start some big revolution. They went in with a really simple idea. They figured if they changed physical things, like the lighting, it would have a direct effect on how productive people were. But what they found was something way, way more profound. And it had almost nothing to do with light bulbs.
So, this brings us to the famous Hawthorne Studies. They started out as this straightforward scientific management style experiment, but they ended up giving birth to a whole new way of thinking, what we now call the human relations movement. It's like they went looking for numbers and data and accidentally found the human element instead.
Okay, so how did this all play out? Well, you can see on the timeline, their whole way of thinking evolved over time. They kicked things off in 1924, just messing with the lights, but by 1927, they'd shifted to isolating small groups to test more complicated stuff. Then, in 1931, they made a really keen move. They just started observing. And by the end of it all, the conclusion was just inescapable. The real story here wasn't about the physical stuff at all, it was all social and psychological.
And the results? They were totally baffling to the researchers at the time. I mean, in those early lighting studies, productivity actually went up sometimes, even when they dimmed the lights. And in that relay assembly room, output just kept on climbing, pretty much no matter what they did with rest breaks or pay. It slowly became clear that the workers were responding to something else entirely. The attention they were getting, the bond they formed as a little group, and this new feeling of actually participating in something. And this whole phenomenon became known as the Hawthorne effect. You know, the idea that just by observing people, you change how they act. But honestly, that's only part of the story. The bigger, more important point was that social and psychological factors, like feeling seen, being part of a team, feeling like you have a voice, were just incredibly powerful motivators, a lot of times even more powerful than pay or working conditions. But the last study they did, it revealed something even deeper. In the bank wiring room, researchers just watched as this group of guys developed their own set of unwritten rules about what a fair day's work looked like. And get this, the peer pressure from inside their own group was way more powerful at controlling work than any bonus plan management could dream up. The social network had its own rules, its own agenda.
So you have all this groundbreaking, kind of weird data from Hawthorne, but it needed someone to make sense of it all, to build a real philosophy from these accidental discoveries. And that's where three key thinkers came into the picture. They basically created the foundation for the whole human relations movement.
First up, you have Harvard professor Elton Mayo. He was absolutely central to figuring out what this all meant, and his big insight was this: work isn't just about a paycheck, it's a social activity. People have these really deep needs for belonging, for recognition. So he argued that managers had to stop being these top-down commanders and start acting more like counselors, understanding and working with these social dynamics, not fighting against them.
Then you've got Chester Barnard, who was actually the president of a telephone company. So he brought this real-world executive view. He said, look, organizations aren't just top-down pyramids. They're systems of cooperative effort. They only work because people are willing to cooperate, and they'll only do that if the rewards, and not just money, but satisfaction and meaning, feel like they're worth the effort.
And this led to his most brilliant idea, the zone of indifference. Barnard's point was that authority isn't something a manager has, it's something an employee gives. An order is only an order if the person on the receiving end actually accepts it. A great leader, then, works to expand that zone of acceptance by building trust and being fair, making people want to follow along.
And then there was Mary Parker Follett, a thinker who was just so incredibly ahead of her time. She made this really critical distinction between power over, the old command and control model, and power with. Power with is all about collaboration, about developing power jointly with your team. It's not a zero-sum game of domination. It's about tapping into the collective energy and smarts of everyone involved.
And this collaborative idea carried right over to how she thought about conflict. Follett didn't see conflict as some bad thing you had to crush. Nope, she saw it as an opportunity. She laid out 3 ways to handle it. Domination, where one side wins and the other loses. Compromise, where everybody gives a little and nobody's really happy. And then her ideal, integration. Integration is where you dig deeper to find a totally new solution that actually satisfies what both sides really need. It's about creating a true win-win, not just splitting the difference.
So, okay, we've just walked through all this incredible history. But why does a factory study from the 1920s still matter for anybody leading a team today? Well, the answer is, it matters a lot. So let's really break down the key takeaways that you can use right now.
All right, here are the big lessons. People aren't just resources on a spreadsheet. They're human beings with real social and psychological needs. That informal social network in your company, the friendships, the alliances, it's real, and it is powerful. Leadership at its heart is relational. Trust and support are just as important as any technical skill. And maybe most importantly, communication and participation, they aren't fluffy luxuries. They are essential investments. At the end of the day, the real job of a modern leader is balancing that constant push for efficiency with a genuine respect for humanity.
Ultimately, this discovery from nearly 100 years ago challenges all of us to ask a really simple but powerful question about our own workplaces. When we talk about performance, are we just focused on the system, the processes, the metrics, the org chart, or are we truly, genuinely focused on the people who make that entire system run? The answer to that question, well, it might just be the secret to unlocking a whole new level of success.